was impossible. We had just lost hours without knowing why. And the worst part was finding out we weren't the first. That this had happened before in that house, with even more terrifying consequences. This topic, my dear community, the one we're touching on tonight, is without a doubt one of the most fascinating to me. It's paranormal, but in a different sense, isn't it? Just as frightening or more so, I can't say. But there is something about this type of event that strikes me as genuinely captivating. I hope you enjoy the stories we have prepared for you tonight, and if you've lived through something similar, we'd love your comments. For now, it's time to begin. There is no turning back. You are listening to Tales of the Night. Hello, community. What I'm about to tell you happened to my girlfriend and me just a few weeks ago, shortly after we moved in together. I'm writing this while it's still warm out, and before it gets dark. Because afterward I get scared talking about this. I'm 20 and she's 19. We left our homes without our parents' permission, so we don't have many options for where to live. A cousin of mine lent us this little house he has in El Álamo, on the outskirts of Hermosillo, and that's where we're staying while we figure things out. The house, as you can imagine, is somewhat isolated. We don't have many neighbors nearby. During the day it doesn't feel that way so much, but at night the neighborhood gets very dark. Then there's the heat. Anyone from Hermosillo will know what I mean. But the little house was lent to us, and we left home without permission, so we're in no position to be picky. The first week we were happy. It was the first time we had lived on our own. Together, of course. And little by little we were learning to do everything for ourselves. One Friday afternoon I got my first paycheck. I came home very happy. It wasn't much money, but to us it mattered, and we wanted to do something to celebrate. We went out to buy things to make a nice dinner and came back to the house. Neither of us really knows how to cook, so we were doing everything together. Reading instructions, watching TikTok videos, asking each other what came next, and laughing at things that went wrong. We had Netflix on the television while we cooked. I don't remember exactly what was playing because we weren't paying much attention to it. It was more for background noise while we made dinner. And that is the last thing I remember. The next thing was opening my eyes. I was lying in our bed. For a few seconds I didn't even think anything was strange. You know how it is when you wake up and it takes a moment to get your bearings, to remember what day it is. I felt like that, but almost immediately I noticed I was fully dressed, with my shoes on. I looked over at my girlfriend. She was lying next to me, also in her clothes. And then she woke up too. We looked at each other. Neither of us knew what had happened or why we were in bed. I remembered being in the kitchen cooking with her, and so did she. We didn't remember having eaten. We didn't remember cleaning up. We didn't even remember going into the bedroom. Nothing. I looked for my phone, and when I found it, I saw it was almost 3 a.m. That's when we got genuinely scared. We got up and went to the kitchen together. The whole house was silent. Outside, there was almost nothing to hear either. As I mentioned, there are no neighbors close by. When we got there, we found everything we had been preparing still sitting on the table. The knives were there, arranged exactly as we had left them while we were cooking. The food was still there. Everything seemed to have been frozen right in the middle of what we were doing. We looked at the television. Netflix was still on, showing that screen asking if we wanted to keep watching. My girlfriend was asking me what had happened, and I was asking her exactly the same thing. We tried to remember what we had done after preparing the food, but neither of us could. It was as if everything had cut off at the same moment, and then we had just woken up like that. For both of us, the last memory was essentially identical. Us in the kitchen making dinner, about to put something in the microwave, and then waking up in bed with hours gone. I don't know how long we spent trying to find an explanation, but we felt pretty shaken. We thought maybe we had fallen asleep, but that didn't explain how we had both ended up in bed, let alone why neither of us remembered doing it. What worried me most was the idea that something had happened to us, and we simply couldn't remember it. In the end, we obviously didn't even eat dinner. We didn't feel like it. A couple of weeks later, I ended up telling my cousin, the one who had lent us the house. I thought he was going to laugh at me. Even while I was telling him, I felt like it sounded absurd. But he didn't laugh. He sat there looking at me very seriously while I told the story. When I finished, he asked me to describe it again. I went through it point by point a second time. How we had been making dinner, and the next thing both of us remembered was waking up in bed at around 3 in the morning. My cousin sat thinking, and then he told me something I hadn't known. Some time back, his parents had lent that same house to a cousin of theirs. The man had just been released from prison in the United States and had been deported to Mexico. The family was trying to help him start over and let him stay there. According to my cousin, it was during his first or second day in the house that something happened. The man was making a repair inside, in the middle of the afternoon, still well before dark. He was working in there, and then at some point, nothing. He simply lost time. His next memory was waking up, and he said it was almost 3 in the morning. He couldn't explain what had happened between one moment and the next. But this time it wasn't a dinner they had been planning. It had cost him far more. When he told the family, no one believed him. In fact, given his history and everything that had happened before he came back to Mexico, they assumed he had used drugs again, that he had done something during those hours and was now making up a story to cover it up. That was the last straw. They stopped helping him. Shortly after that, the man left the house. My cousin told me that for years he too had assumed the whole thing had been a lie, and he never had any reason to believe otherwise. Until I told him what had happened to us, and there was something that stood out to him. I had known absolutely nothing about that other story. My girlfriend even less. And yet the three of us, that man and us, years apart, had woken up in that same house with no memory of what we had done during those missing hours, all of us at close to 3 in the morning. My cousin told me that since we told him this, he hasn't stopped thinking about his uncle, because now he wonders whether everyone was wrong about him, whether what he said happened to him in that house really did happen. The last anyone heard of him, he was apparently in Ensenada, living on the street. My cousin wants to save up money to go find him. Hello, community. My name is Luis. I'm sending this more to find out if anyone has had similar experiences than as a horror story, because more than 40 years have passed, and we at least have no idea what really happened. This took place in the 1980s when my father was working as a polisher for Ciba-Geigy, a company that no longer exists. They had a complex of pharmaceutical plants in what is now the Villa Coyoacán area of Mexico City. My father lived in Xochimilco, so every day after his shift, he made essentially the same journey home. One night, he left work as usual after finishing his shift at night. He signed out and began walking toward the bridge he always used to cross Calzada de Tlalpan. It was a route he knew perfectly, and up until that moment, nothing unusual had ever happened, until he was approaching the bridge and felt something. My father describes it as an intense heat, though he says he has never been able to explain exactly what he felt or where it came from. Even after all this time, he has never been able to find the right words. What he remembers is that everything around him lit up for just a fraction of a second. He says it was as if someone had suddenly switched on stadium floodlights, an extremely bright light that appeared all at once. And then nothing. Darkness. My father tried to understand what had just happened. He closed his eyes tightly, thinking maybe the light had blinded him, and waited a few seconds before opening them again. At first, his vision was blurry. Slowly, it started to come back until he could finally make out what was in front of him. And that was when he realized he was no longer near Calzada de Tlalpan. He was in Xochimilco, specifically standing in front of an intersection known as El Crucero. Anyone familiar with that area will know exactly where I mean. According to my father, he He was approximately 10 kilometers from the spot where he remembered being a moment before. He couldn't understand how he had gotten there in a matter of seconds. He clearly remembered walking toward the bridge, feeling that heat, seeing the light, closing his eyes. And that was it. He didn't remember getting on any form of transport. He didn't remember walking those kilometers. And he couldn't explain how he had suddenly appeared so close to his house. He was very confused, but all he wanted was to get home. From El Crucero, it was less than a kilometer, and he covered that distance as fast as he could. As he walked, he noticed something else strange. Back in those years, according to my father, Xochimilco was a very lively place. Especially on Fridays, it was common to find people outside their houses, listening to music, neighbors drinking in the street, someone playing a guitar. It was part of daily life. But this time the streets were empty. None of that was anywhere to be found. Even so, my father continued home and went inside. His partner at the time received him very aggressively. She was furious. My father was still trying to process what had happened on the way, so he simply asked her what was wrong. She began to reproach him. There is an important detail to understand here. Sometime before, my father had been unfaithful to her, and since then the relationship had been very strained. So when she saw him walk in, she immediately assumed he had done it again. She accused him, said that if he was going to go back to cheating, at least have the decency to let her know he wasn't coming home. My father didn't understand and asked what she was talking about. Then she said, "You disappear for 2 days and you still have the nerve to ask me what's wrong?" My father thought he had heard wrong. 2 days? She didn't even want to argue. She told him to do whatever he wanted and went furiously to the bedroom. My father stood there trying to process what he had just heard. It made no sense to him. He had left work, and as far as he could tell, barely minutes had passed since he was walking toward the bridge. So he went to turn on the television. In those years, without a cell phone, that was the easiest way to confirm the date and find out what was happening. He turned it on and found the news. He stood watching until he could confirm it. It was Monday. That was impossible. My father remembered leaving work before the weekend. Yet in his house approximately 2 days had passed, and his partner had spent all that time not knowing where he was. For him, that time simply didn't exist. He then checked his belongings. He had his watch, his wallet, his money, his ID. Nothing seemed to be missing at all. He was also wearing the same clothes he had left work in. My father used to change before heading home to keep his everyday clothes clean while working, and what struck him most was that he still looked essentially the same as when he had left. Nothing about his appearance gave him any clue as to where he had been during all that time. He tried to remember, but there was nothing to recall. His last memory was being near Calzada de Tlalpan, feeling that heat, and watching everything light up for a few seconds. Then he had closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, he was in Xochimilco, kilometers away. He never found out how he got there, and even less what happened during those 2 days. More than 40 years have passed since then. My father has not the slightest idea what happened during those 2 days, and I want to repeat, this involved a different partner, not my mother. So there is no reason my father would tell us this story if it weren't true. Whatever happened in those 2 days remains completely lost time for him. I had never had any paranormal experience in my life until we moved there. The house is new. We moved in as soon as it was finished, and that is where the stories happen that I'll share some other day. But today I'll start with this one. I was still in university, about 4 years ago, and I had to build a scale model as a final project. That same week was also exam season, so I had to study. That night I decided to finish the model first. I was studying physical therapy, and the project was on the bone anatomy of the knee. I was almost done. I just needed to glue 3 small felt pieces, meaning I literally only had to apply adhesive and stick them on. That's what I was working on when I saw it was 2:54 in the morning. I know because I had music playing, and at that exact moment the music stopped. Since it was warm weather, I had the window open. The curtains were drawn, but the window was open. My room is on the second floor, and the window looks out over the patio and then toward the street. Then I started hearing horrible sounds, almost like screams. At first I thought they might be turkeys, but none of the neighbors had turkeys, and besides, the sound seemed to be coming from right below my window. They were horrifying. I got so scared that I didn't want to study for my exam anymore. The only thing I wanted was to glue those 3 remaining pieces so I could go to bed. So I glued them quickly. I stood up from the chair, closed the window without looking outside or opening the curtains, turned off the light, ran to my bed, and pulled the covers up over my face. Then I snapped back. Somehow I came back, and I was still sitting in the chair. The 3 little pieces were still unglued. I didn't understand what had happened, but I did it all again. I quickly glued the 3 remaining figures to my model, got up from the chair, closed the window without looking outside, turned off the light, ran to my bed, and pulled the covers up over my face. And again I snapped back, still sitting in front of the model, about to glue the last figures. I did it again, and it happened again. I swear it happened again. After several attempts, I got so frightened that I decided not to even finish the model. I just got up to close the window, went to turn off the light, and snapped back again, sitting in the chair. This happened to me about 7 times, maybe. I can't remember exactly how many. Finally, I tried to concentrate. This time I did everything very deliberately, very slowly. I sat back down and carefully finished the model, and when I glued that last figure, I looked at the clock. It was 3:54 in the morning. An entire hour had passed, an hour in which all I had been trying to do was glue 3 small felt figures, something that would normally have taken me 5 minutes. I didn't want to do anything else. I left everything as it was, went to lie down, and this time I didn't even turn off the light. I just lay there like that until sleep finally took me.